Hello everyone, Stjepan here. In this video we are going to go over the Chigorin variation of the Closed Ruy Lopez, which is one of the most popular ways for black to fight for an advantage and to equalize against the Spanish opening or the Ruy Lopez, and one of the most aggressive ways for black to play. And usually white will be a tiny bit better in those positions and have a slight edge in the center and squeeze black, but black has a lot of chances to equalize and to stand well in the position. The Chigorin variation occurs after the Closed Ruy Lopez, so e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. This is now the Spanish game or the Ruy Lopez, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on the basics of the opening. I did a separate video on that subject, so if you're interested, I will put the link in the description below. And today we are only going to focus on the Chigorin. So now a6 by black, bishop to a4, knight to f6, castles, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop to b3, and in this position, of course, black goes for d6. The other move would be castling, which would perhaps lead to the martial attack, but that's another subject once again. So d6, c3 by white, preparing d4, preparing to put the bishop back on c2. Once again, if you lack knowledge in the basic theory of this line of the Closed Ruy Lopez, I would recommend you watch the video on the basics first before continuing on the Chigorin defense. Now castles, h3, this move is important because black has to prevent the bishop from pinning the knight, which is indirectly defending d4. And now from this position on move 9, there are a lot of variations which branch out of the Closed Ruy Lopez, and one of them is the Chigorin, which we are going to cover today, which is knight to a5 by black. And this is one of the most aggressive ways for black to play. The other variations which can occur in the game, which are very popular and good for black, are the Breyer, which I've covered in a separate video as well. You can find the link in the description below. The Breyer, this is another variation. Black could go for bishop to b7, which is the Flohr system, and there's another line with knight to d7, which is the Keres variation, and there are a few more lines, but the Breyer with knight to b8 and the Chigorin with knight to a5 are the most important and the best lines for black. And the basic idea that black is trying to achieve with this move, first of all, to chase the bishop away. That's white's next move in 100% of games anyway. So bishop to c2, chasing the bishop away. The idea is to get a stronger center by playing c5 and then in some positions retreating the knight back to c6 after the pawn has moved. So black is fighting for the center as well, and the only weakness he will usually have is the d5 square in his position, but black will stand well. So the knight, even though it might seem misplaced on the rim of the board, it's not, because it's done its job and it chased the bishop away from the long diagonal and from the most active square, attacking the weakest point of black's position, the f7 square. So after bishop to c2, black plays c5, that's the main idea, as I said, and then returning the knight back to c6 after a few moves. And after c5, white will play d4, the main move, fighting for the center. This move was prepared by basically all of white's moves with c3, knight to f3, rook to e1, the queen is perfectly placed anyway. So white's main idea in many Spanish positions is to push d4, and now it can be achieved. Black usually replies with queen to c7, activating the queen, supporting d6 and c5. White will usually continue with knight b to d2, and this is now just the main line. I will cover a few sidelines as well. And the point of white's position now is that he will usually try to maneuver this knight from f1 to g3 and to f5, which is a very common Ruy Lopez knight maneuver. This bishop will usually end up on e3, on this diagonal. The rooks are good here. The other rook will most probably come to c1, fighting for the c file, and that's white's plan. And black will usually play rook to e8, bishop to f1, just getting to f8, getting the bishop out of the way. The light square bishop will go to b7, the knight will come back to c6, and the rooks will come to c8 and to e8, as I already said. So this is the basic plan. And after knight to b2, black plays c takes d4, opening up the position, resolving the central tension. C takes d4, knight to c6, now finally returning the knight to its proper square, and knight to b3. And knight to b3 is the most common move because even though it might look tempting, d5 isn't that good for white. After d5,
black simply plays knight to b4, and after bishop to b1, the bishop was attacked twice, it has to retreat, and it might seem that black's knight is stranded and it might fall after a move such as a3, but black simply plays a5, and now if the knight is attacked, then simply knight to a6, and now black has the c5 square, and if white challenges the c5 square with a move such as b4, then after a takes, black would have a much bigger advantage than white on the queen side, and he would have the open a file for the rook. And that's why after knight to c6, d5 is not such a good move. And okay, it does gain space in the center, it's black's main weakness, but you should always be careful because d5 also creates a lot of weaknesses, especially the c5 square. So be careful about playing d5. And the main move is knight to b3, and knight to b3 is first of all defending the d4 square. It's rerouting the knight and provoking a tempo by black in a way, because white has to develop his c1 bishop, and the knight has to move for white to do that, and he has just enough time, because now after a5, of course if he allows a4 then the knight has to go back, but white has just enough time to play bishop to e3, and now after a4 knight b to d2 coming back, and this means now that the pawn is sufficiently defended once again, because if the knight moved somewhere else and covered the queen and the bishop wasn't on e3, then d4 would drop because it's attacked twice and defended only by the bishop if the knight moves. So this is the main line theory, a4 knight b to d2, and now black usually replies with bishop to d7. Bishop to b7 is not considered as good. The light squared bishop should be defending b5 and helping black's queenside pawn push. Now rook to c1 by white, queen to b7. This is just the main line I'm covering, and this is basically the starting position of the Chigorin, and there are still over 700 games from this position, and that's Grandmaster games, and in general, I don't know, there's probably 10,000 games from here. This is very well known theory. And after this move, queen to b7, white usually plays queen to e2. The point of this move is to connect the rooks and give the bishop some support when it comes to d3. So this is a very strong central structure now by white. Queen to e2, rook f to e8, developing his rook. The bishop will, as I said, go to f8. This is the main plan. Bishop to d3, rook a to b8, and now d takes e5. Usually the tension in the center is resolved, and still we are still in common theory. There are 200 games from this position, and I think the highest rated one is Kramnik Michael Adams from 2005. Then there's Shirov Akopian Vladimir, Evgenia Alexeeva Akopian, Shirov Dorfman. So a lot of very strong grandmaster games from here, and this is still highly theoretical. Now the main move, of course, is knight takes. You are provoking white to take back, so knight takes, d takes, and this is okay. I would stop here with the main line. It goes a bit further on, and there are still a few games from here, but usually the games will branch out even sooner than this. But the main position you have to remember is this one after rook to c1. So usually after, okay, let's just go back. After h3, knight to a5, the bishop has to retreat. Black plays c5, advancing in the center. d4, white challenging the center with his prepared d4 push immediately. Queen to c7, preparing to support his central pawns. Knight b to d2, c takes d4, c takes d4, knight to c6, getting the knight back now that the c pawn is out of the way, of course. Knight to b3, not playing d5, because after d5, knight to b4, bishop to b1, a5, a3, knight to a6, and black would have c5. So the best move is knight to b3, provoking black to push his pawns, but leaving white with enough time to put the bishop on e3. So a5, bishop e3, a4, knight b to d2, bishop to d7 developing, freeing up the c8 square for the rook, so that black can take the c file. Now rook to c1, queen to b7, getting away from any discoveries by the white bishop, because the rook was on c7, of course. Queen to e2, connecting rooks, preparing to support the bishop on d3, rook f to e8, etc, etc. So this is the position. This after move 17, rook to c1, you have to know it up to this point if you want to even attempt to play the Chigorin. And the main ideas from here on, usually black will try to push through in the center somehow, sometimes getting an isolated queen pawn, but that's not such a major downside for black. He will advance on the queen side with b4, b3 in some positions when a4 is sufficiently defended. This bishop has to do something, so usually rook to e8, bishop to f8, sometimes even g6 and bishop to g7, getting on this diagonal, or even bishop to h6. And the knight will sometimes reroute. Perhaps the f6 knight is going to go to d7, and then black will prepare f5. So these are some plans. And white usually plays knight to f1, knight to g3, challenging f5. Perhaps the light square bishop will come from d3 to f1, defending the weak h3 square. And those are some ideas for white to remaneuver his pieces. As I said already, d5 is a very risky move, and it should always be calculated precisely, but in some positions it does work, especially in conjunction with a3, which is defending b4, so not giving the knight the possibility to reroute from b4 to a6 and then to c5. So a good plan is a3, d5 for white. Another thing white could try is reroute the knight not to f1 and to g3, but back to b2 and then to c3, attacking b5 and provoking b5, and those are some ideas. But I would definitely recommend you to study some games from the Chigorin. I will link some in the description below, and I will leave I think I will put 10 or 20 games. I'll just write them down for you so we can find them online, and you can find the PGNs of the games very easily. Just type them into Google. And now I would like to go over some sidelines. Firstly, after knight to a5 and bishop to c2, there is one other move that black could play instead of c5, which is by far the most common, but there is a sideline that black could play which can be dangerous if you don't know it. Black could play d5, which might seem weird, but it's actually very aggressive, and white always responds with d4. You have to challenge the center, and now there is only one correct way for black to continue playing, and that's d takes e4. And after d takes e4, white plays knight takes c5, c5, bishop to e3, bishop to b7, knight to d2, and you can see that black has a lot of activity. He got a very active bishop on b7. He will get the knight back into the game, and the knight is actually not misplaced on a5 in this position. He will quickly get to play bishop to d6, and this position resembles the martial attack a bit, and black has a lot of activity. The only thing is that he hasn't sacrificed the pawn yet, even though the e pawn often does fall, because white is placing all of his pieces on it, and white will usually play queen to b1, and the bishop is attacking e4, the queen is attacking e4, the knight is attacking e4. Sometimes the bishop would move to g5, pinning the knight, and then the rook is attacking as well. So there isn't too much hope for black to save his e-pawn, so white usually regains it. That's why one sideline. But c5 is much more common. And after c5 and white playing d4, as I said, the most common move is queen to c7, but some other moves that black could try, which are all good, for example, are knight to d7, but this usually now transposes to the Keres variation, which starts with the move 9, knight to d7. Another possibility is c takes d4 immediately without playing queen to c7, and after c takes d4, playing bishop to b7. This is a slightly more active line. And after d4, another move is bishop to b7 immediately, or knight to c6, just placing the knight back right away. And after d5, knight to a5, black is okay in this position. He provoked d5, so any c4 move by black will lock down the position, and it will resemble the Breyer Ruy Lopez in some positions, so it will be okay for black. But anyway, the Chigorin is a very active position for black. As you can see, I will go back to this position after move 17, rook to c1. And black has a lot of space on the queen side, and with the moves such as rook to c8, rook to b8, he will usually be able to force down even white to back down even further and win some more space. But white has a lot more attacking prospects on the king side, because black doesn't really have anything here. And the only plan, as I said, is to play knight to d7 or even knight to e8 and then to push with f5, perhaps even h6, knight to h7 and then f5. But if black wants to do something on the king side, that's probably the only idea, is to break through with f5. And by the time black does that, white is already on g3 with his knight, sometimes even knight to h4, and then the knights could double on the f5 square, and white will have a lot of attacking prospects, especially if the f6 knight moves, and then the queen could even come to h5 to the attack. So a very double-edged position, but a highly theoretical position, and engine-wise it's completely equal, the first 20 moves, and both sides have good chances, but the middle game plans are what separates the position from being winning or losing for either side. So I would suggest that you learn this position, just learn all the moves, study all the moves. You have to get to know why you play those moves, and firstly study the Ruy Lopez in general and the closed lines in the Ruy Lopez. But if you want to study the Chigorin, you have to remember this, and after that find something of your own. Find the plan. You can look at plans created by other players. I would suggest looking at games by Bobby Fischer, especially the one against Unziker, which he played in '59 in the Zurich tournament. So that's a very instructive way. He played knight to f1 in that game, and then didn't go to h3. He played knight to h2 and knight to g4, which confused Unziker completely, and he ended up winning a brilliant game because of that maneuver. So there are a lot of deviations you could go for, which black doesn't necessarily have to be prepared for, and you have to find something of your own. But the main thing you have to remember is, to get to this position, you have to push through with d4, you have to develop your bishop, be able to bring your knight back to d2, support e5 with the rook, with the bishop, and play a solid position. And if you are black, you need to know what to do with the c5 break, you need to know when to return the knight, you need to know what to do if white ever pushes with d5, how to exploit that. You have to learn how to get the maximum out of your space on the queen side. So those are some things to look out for in the position. Okay, everybody, I hope you liked this video on the Chigorin Ruy Lopez, and I hope you got to learn something, and stay tuned for more theoretical videos and chess analysis. Thanks very much. Bye.